These are going to be some helpful hits for week 4 quiz 1. And let's go through this quiz. For questions 1 through 3, you're going to have to use this graphic. Basically, this graphic is showing 4 different shifts, 2 of which are for the supply curve. So this graph A, supply curve shifting leftward, graph B, supply curve shifting rightward, and then the demand curve shifting leftward, the demand curve shifting rightward. Now the key here is these are supply curves and demand curves for the U.S. farming market. So you could think of a crop, let's say like wheat or corn. So this is the demand curve, the supply curve shifting leftward for corn, the supply curve shifting right for corn, and demand curves as such. So once you have that established, I'm going to give you 3 different scenarios in questions 1, 2, and 3 that are going to describe a situation where one of these curves will will shift. You have to decide, is it going to be graph A, B, C, or D that is described in the question. For example, in this case, OPEC. Now OPEC is an organization of countries that control oil reserves. It says if OPEC raises oil prices, in other words, they engineer an increase in oil prices, which causes a significant increase in the cost of fuel for tractors, for farm vehicles, what impact do you think that's going to have on either the supply curve or the demand curve? So if you think this is going to have an impact on the demand curve, then you have to ask, okay, it's got to be either C or D. Do I think this situation is going to cause the demand curve to shift to the left or to the right? If you think it's going to cause the demand curve to shift to the right, you would choose option D. And that's what you do for each one of these questions. Which curve do you think is affected for this particular market? And what direction do you think it's going to shift? That's questions 1 through 3. Now for questions 4 through 6, I give you a supply and demand curve, and I'm showing a supply curve and 2 demand curves. Now, for question number 4, I say what best describes a movement from point E1 to E3? So E1 to E3. Now, one of these 4 things describes a situation that would get you from E1 to E3. You've got to decide which one it is. And then basically, for 5, after the shift of the demand curve, what does E1 represent? So, you're starting here, then the demand curve shifts from here to here. Now, E1 represented something with the old demand curve. So in other words, what does equilibrium here represent? Well, it represents both quantity supplied and quantity demanded. If the demand curve shifts from here to here, does this still represent quantity supplied and quantity demanded? You have to decide which one that is. And for question number 5, a shift of the demand curve, we already covered that one. The new equilibrium is approximately, so after you shift the curve, where's the new equilibrium? E1, E2, or E3? Question 7 is, I think, rather straightforward. Now, question 8 is rather challenging. 4 students from your econ class are sitting in a local restaurant discussing the market for coffee. Now, that's critical. They're discussing the market for coffee. Below are quotes from each of the 4 students. All of the following quotes are logically correct except for one. So one of these is incorrect. So the key here is to focus on that. Think about the market for coffee, and one of these is not going to be consistent with the statement and the market for coffee. This is going to be straightforward. Question number 9 and question number 10. Now, in my video lecture, I discussed the difference between a movement along the curve and a shift of the curve. When you change price, you move along the curve, and we call that a change in quantity demanded. when you shift the curve, we call that a change in overall demand. So it may help to review that section of my video lecture that covers that, and that will help you answer question number 10. Okay, hope this helps.